And there was sound. Good evening, everybody. May I kindly ask you to take your seats, because we want to start with the panel on the role of transparency in combating political corruption on both sides of the divide. A warm welcome from my side. I'm Hubert Faustmann. I'm the director of the Friedrich-Ebert-Foundation here in Cyprus, which is
recording.
Pardon? Which is a partner of the Cyprus Forum, a knowledge partner. So thank you to the Cyprus Forum to invite us to this role. Before I introduce the speakers, a few words about the foundation and our work here that led to that panel, because many of you might not be familiar who we are and what we do. So the Ebert Foundation is a German party political affiliated foundation. It's affiliated with the Social Democratic Party of Germany and has to do with a peculiarity that in Germany, a party in parliament gets actually money from the taxpayer to set up a foundation that's affiliated with it. We are the oldest one, founded in 1925, and the foundation works in Germany, but also internationally. It has offices in 106 countries all around the world, one here since 2011. We work a lot on the Cyprus problem, but also on issues like good governance or regional cooperation, in particular energy. And this led us basically to the work that leads to this panel, because 6 years ago, I think, Sertac, Sonan and Ömer Göçkus approached me as a head and asked, there's nothing that is the equivalent of the corruption research work that's done by Transparency International in the Republic of Cyprus. Back then, there was a chapter, the Republic of Cyprus was included, and obviously corruption is a huge issue in the North, and the North was not part of that debate. I really liked the idea. So we set up, now we have 6 reports, an annual study based on the methodology of Transparency International for the North to include the North in the international ranking, which is probably the most famous thing about Transparency International. So it's like the charts, and the lower you are, like in the real charts, the worse it is for you, the more corrupt you are. And this work has had a huge impact, I think, in particular on the society in the North. But we are the Ebert Foundation, so we try to bridge and bring the conversation into the realm of both communities. So the problem was that there were problems with the chapter of the Republic of Cyprus in the South, and I think they stopped cooperating or stopped functioning. And I understand there's now a process going on that might lead to the reestablishment of a chapter in the South, and I hope that that is successful. It would be very, very good. Because what we try to do, also Christophoros comes into the plane, is to not only launch it in the North, the Turkish version of this report. This is how it looks like. That's just the last one, and it's outside for you to grab together with the old reports. It's not just launching it in the North in Turkish, but actually having a debate here in the Home for Cooperation, inviting Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and ideally an expert from the South to compare corruption of both sides of the divide. And that brought Christophoros into the game, because we invited him to one of those events. And that brings us to today's event. So Sertac Sonan is Associate Professor of Political Science and International Relations, but also the Director of the Research Center for Cypriot and Mediterranean Studies. Christophoros Christophorou is not only an old friend, like Sertac is, but also a political and media analyst with a strong expertise on elections, political parties, whereas the Bible I refer to, but a lot of other work, human rights related, but also on issues of good governance, clientelism and corruption, and that makes him an expert that is suitable to complement the panel as far as the South is concerned. And Flora Cresswel, I'm really happy to have here, because she's actually the regional coordinator for Western Europe of Transparency International. And I wanted her here, not only to learn about the work in the North, but mainly to contribute the external perspective, the recommendations from an out of the island perspective on how transparency can help to combat corruption. That's the end of my introduction. No, it's almost the end of my introduction. As Ebert Foundation, we do a newsletter where we describe every month what happens on both sides of the divide, politically, economically, socially. In English, it's for free. You can subscribe to it. You can scan that. You can send us an email. There's also a list outside. It also informs you about the events we have, and I strongly encourage you to sign up. It's for free. If you don't like it, just send us an email. I don't want that crap anymore, and then we'll take you off the list. From crap to quality, Christophoros, I think your first 7 minutes each. The floor is yours. No bargaining. This is the Orient here.
with an aphorism saying that the concept of transparency is a perverted concept by politicians. Why perverted? Because very often, is used as if it is a self-sufficient concept or a self-sufficient variable in democracy, in the rule of law. Actually, in order for transparency to work, this should be in the service of a goal, a specific goal, the the enforcement of law and the rule of law in general in a country. The main question is, what is transparency? Is it what some say, lie to everything? And what transparency requires in order for it to serve the goals of a rule of law? And what are the elements of transparency? To me, the elements of transparency is everything that leads to a decision, that sheds light on the persons that took the decision, on their relationships, on their motivations in order to take this, and various other things. You cannot stop transparency to a certain point. What happens in Cyprus? I start from where I repeat what I said at the beginning. Politicians used to say everything to light. It was many times repeated by the former leader of the Democratic Rally, everything to light. But what does this mean, everything to light? For example, they publish the sources of their revenues of the past year. And we see the changes, etc. What is the goal served by this? If there is no transparency on where this money or other property was found, how it was made, etc., and other things, what does this serve? It serves nothing. In order also for transparency to work, there must be some mechanism, some bodies that should take care of the use of the elements that come to light in order to see if they are in compliance with the law, and also take measures, sanctions maybe, against people that are liable for something which was a wrongdoing. What happens in Cyprus? Which is the body, for example, for this, the sources of the property issues of politicians, etc., is a former justice and who served also in Ireland, but also the Director General of the House of Representatives, etc. And what do they do with this? Nothing. They just collect it and they say, hey, you haven't put forward your report, etc., etc. So, what is the result of all these things and other things? I mean, the result is that, according to the reports by the International Bank, from 2013 until 2020 and until today, Cyprus has shown the biggest decline in transparency and in respect of the will to fight transparency. Nevertheless, we have had, I don't know, I can say repeated, but maybe tens of times the statements by the former president that, and also announcement of measures, etc., etc. But we see that this was to no avail. We haven't had any result. I can stop here and continue. Thank you.
Contrary to my expectations. So, element of from the element of surprise to corruption in the north.
Can I use this extra 2 minutes? Does this work? Yeah. Thank you, Hubert, for organizing this, and good evening, everyone. I'll try to make 3 points in the limited time I have. First, I'll start with the question, what's going on in the north in terms of corruption? I'll refer to our 6 reports, and I'll basically say that things were not so bad at the beginning, but it got worse in the last couple of days, which will bring me to the second question. I'll try to explain why this happened. Because we had a dramatic deterioration. So my second point will be on that. I'll try to explain why. And thirdly, I'm going to explain why I think that things will get worse before they get better in the north in the next couple of years. Very soon we'll be on the field for our 7th report. Normally in November, December we start. And I'm afraid things will be in this report, in the next report, the situation will be even worse. So going back to the first question, what's going on in the north? As Hubert said earlier, I and Ömer Gökçekuş, my co-author and colleague, we try to measure corruption perceptions in the north with the support of Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung and using the methodology of Transparency International. So when we prepared our first study back in 2017, the score was 40. So I mean, Transparency International's ranges from 0, super corrupt, to 100, super clean. So our score was 40, global average was 43. So it's not perfect, but you know, I mean, you can live with that kind of thing and hoping that it will get better soon. The second one was more or less at the same place. Third one, again, by the way, among 180 countries, this would place us in the in the 80th place. Again, not so good, below the EU average, worse than the Republic of Cyprus, but you know, it was okay. Then in 2020, we saw a decline from 40 to 36, and then the score fell off a hill, fell off a cliff in 2021. It went down to 28, and then in 2022, it went down to 27. So it's a dramatic decline, and it was not only us actually seeing this and measuring this. By the way, maybe to elaborate on how we do this, basically corruption perceptions index is based on an interview with business executives. We interview 350 people, and also a group of experts, a separate interview with them or a survey with them. So it's the combination of these two. So it was pretty bad, and there are also anecdotal evidence as well as, for instance, Chief Justice saying that things are not going well in the last couple of years. So the question is, why is this happening? Okay, I mean, North Cyprus, it's a de facto state, we know, and it's not a normal state, okay? But what really matters here is that it was a de facto state 6 years earlier. Why did things were better at that time? So this brings me to the second question, why? So I would say the answer is in 2 words, democratic backsliding. It's a global phenomenon. It's happening everywhere, but we have our special kind of democratic backsliding in the north as well. It was Annan Plan in many respects was an important milestone, and for Turkish Cypriots as well. This was the time when a kind of normalization started, a kind of democratization started, where we saw alternation of power between two big political parties, one from the left, one from the right. This stopped as of 2020. So it's another important milestone for us, and 2020 marked the presidential election in the north, which ended with, which started this democratic backsliding, I would say. To cut the long story short, in a nutshell, I would say at this point, Turkey forged an alliance, a coalition between three right-wing parties, let's say, partition parties, and to help Mr. Tatar to win the election. They won the election, and in return, they became the coalition partners. And since then, the North is run by these three parties. This gave them a sense of invincibility, because they think that they're irreplaceable, because the left is not getting along well with Turkey. So everyone is condemned to them. So this is like to refer to this old saying from Lord Acton: power tends to corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So this sense of invincibility gave them, I would say, how do you say, I mean, courage or impunity in a way. So it's getting worse each day. And again, it's not me, it's not our report saying that, but everybody else as well, including whenever you look at the newspapers, you see that, you know, I mean, it's getting worse and worse and worse. Every day you have a different scandal, and what happens? Not much, actually, because at the end of the day, we I mean, unfortunately, distorted this accountability mechanism. So, I mean, they say, all right, whatever we do, we win elections. And they do win. They did win elections. So, which brings me to my third point, why I think that it's going to get worse. Well, first, this government is this coalition government. This is the most right-wing government we saw since 1974-76, I would say, and they're likely to stay, because there will be no elections in 4 years' time, and also, I mean, because they have the backing of Ankara, they don't feel any pressure to you know, change anything. So that's the bad part. But there are two other points, other bad things happening at the background, and this is in a way a silent attack on two other pillars of good governance, which are freedom of the press and independence of judiciary. So on both fronts, things are not going well. Okay? Judiciary is seen in the north as the last line of defense before the hell breaks loose. I mean, the last line of defense for good governance. People trust the judiciary, courts, etc. But the problem is they are inundated by cases, and they are understaffed systematically and underfinanced. Okay? So we have limited number of judges. They try to, and of course the bad thing is that at some point, along with the presidential election in 2020, there was this constitutional amendment to increase the number of judges from 8 to 16. I mean, people somehow said no to that as well. I don't know what the exact reason was, but so we are limited with 8 judges, as I said, they're understaffed, financed. People, they don't have enough personnel, and this is undermining actually the trust towards judiciary. So that's one bad news, and we all, once in a while we have these speculation that there will be a judiciary reform, which will bring us closer to the Turkish system. So that's another threat. And lastly, the freedom of the press. Things are not going well there as well. There are more and more journalists which are brought to the court. And on top of that, we have, I don't know, I lost count of cases, but many of them are denied entry to Turkey. So as a punishment for what they write. So in a situation where we have these attacks on two pillars, two safeguards of good governance, I'm afraid I don't have any good news to say. Sorry for finishing it with a super negative note.
Thank you very much, Sertac. Flora, Transparency.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here, especially in this fantastic venue. I'll try and be brief because I know I'm standing between you and the networking drinks. So, yeah, first I thought I'd just provide a little bit more detail of what Transparency International is before I answer your question. So we're the largest anti-corruption network in the world. We have a presence in over 100 countries. Essentially, our mission is to hold power to account. Whether that's in relation to cross-border corruption, but also in terms of holding governments at the national level to higher standards in fighting corruption. We are most well known for the Corruption Perceptions Index, but actually I want to start by referencing another research tool that we use, which is the Global Corruption Barometer, which alternatively to the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, which is the perceptions from business and experts. The barometer is the perception of the public towards corruption, which I personally hold dearer to my heart in terms of what the public actually think. And the last time we collected the data in Europe was in 2021, and it showcased the lack of trust that people in the EU had towards their government, that we have a crisis of political integrity. And sadly, Cyprus was one of the worst performing countries in Europe. I'm sure these stats wouldn't come as much surprise to you, but according to those results, 88% of people think that corruption is a problem in the government in Cyprus, and 65% of people don't think that governments do enough to fight corruption in Cyprus. So, I mean, it reflects the issue at hand within the country, but what I want to do in terms of answering your question, what can Transparency do to fight political corruption? I'll end on in terms of, we're ending the first day, and I'll be a bit controversial in questioning the title of the whole conference, but transparency is just the precondition of fighting corruption. So it's not the end game, and I'll answer that a little bit in my answer. But what can it do? Firstly, when we think about transparency in fighting political corruption, we're talking about access to information. So disclosures of details such as how public decision-making is taking place, how public funds are being made, who's funding political parties, what actions are the government taking in particular sectors, for example. And one thing that we advocate for at TI is that there's strong access to information laws within a country, but also that the data is in an open format and readable for a government to release that information. Something that we actually launched this year and previous years as well is that we have a platform which is called Integrity Watch, which is in 16 EU member countries, sadly not in Cyprus, but it actually uses data of that type of decision-making, public decision-making, and maps political risk in an online tool. So for example, our platform in France looks at lobbying data from the lobby register in France, and you can see who your MP is meeting, what kind of companies they're meeting with, etc., to get a broader understanding of the type of influence that exists, whether at the national level or the EU level. So really, if governments are serious about fighting political corruption, having that open data that is readable is really key. Of course, transparency is also really crucial in building trust in society. I don't think I need to go into too much detail about this, but corruption, it creates polarization, it perpetuates inequalities, it affects the most vulnerable in society. And without that, the act of transparency in terms of understanding how public decision making is taking place, it really, I mean, as the stats that I've shown reflect when trust no longer exists between the citizen and their government. But as I mentioned, one area that I really want to highlight, though, as I said, of considering how transparency is a precondition. And what I mean by this is that, and I think my panelists have alluded to this, is that other mechanisms need to be in place to ensure that it's an effective tool to fight corruption. So what do I mean by this? I mean, for example, that we have strong legislations and ethics frameworks in countries. So for example, again, that politicians, public officials, or political parties are transparent about their data, and there's independent oversight bodies that actually regulate that and provide sanctions when public officials don't follow those rules. And key, I emphasize independent anti-corruption bodies that exist in countries as something that we strongly advocate for at TI and that are effectively enforced. Another thing is also effective integrity mechanisms within countries. Again, through the means of code of ethics, or again, ethics frameworks, an ethics body that exists within the country is crucial to ensure that public officials actually, apply tools of transparency when they're doing public decision making. And then finally, the last point, which is really crucial, is that transparency is paired with accountability, not only in terms of an oversight body, but that it empowers civil society and independent media to actually hold politicians accountable. So transparency is not, without accountability, it's not an effective tool. And I'll give an example of, for example, where a member state in the EU has perhaps ticked the box to say we're transparent, which makes it difficult for actually civil society to monitor. When we were doing the analysis for the Integrity Watch platform that I mentioned, the Spanish government, they released data in a kind of a PDF format of their lobbying data of at the national level of their politicians. In a very unreadable format, it's not accessible for really anyone to be able to analyze or evaluate, or even civil society to have the funds to do that, or journalists. So they tick a box, but they're not really providing the mechanisms at place for those actors to say, actually, how has policy been influenced in the country? So those mechanisms, the kind of all of society approach to corruption, is really crucial if transparency is an effective tool.
Flora was exactly what I wanted as a contribution in terms of, I think it really widened the scope and the understanding of what it would take in Cyprus to improve things. I'm very tempted to ask the question, what of these mechanisms is in place? But idea was actually to include the audience. That means leave 20-25 minutes for Q&A, and I'll suggest we do it one-on-one. So be very brief, shortly introduce yourself, ask a question if you want to, or a short comment if you have one, and ask which, or address the speaker, or tell us which speaker you want. Is there any question or comment? Maybe I can. Tobias, if you can just bring a bright microphone.
My name is Andreas Ioannidis, and I run a company in Cyprus about research. And I was surprised to find that the previous research that grants that were given by the Cyprus Research Foundation was actually available in Excel format, which goes to your. So my question is for the general corruption that we are concerned about politicians. Are these data available in Cyprus? Can you, for example, use them? We have the tools to do the analysis, but can we use them? And if they are accessible, what about the data protection rules, which usually in Cyprus goes against transparency? And a general question about that. How do you see the conflict between the two? Data transparency, transparency as you mentioned it, and its use, and data protection, which in my mind in Cyprus often is used to cover things up.
Referencing data in terms of aspects such as like political finance, the data I just referenced. Okay, yeah.
I was part of the European Union consortium, which had on graph theories, in which it has transparency and corruption as one of the things, which I wanted to do something with Cyprus, but I wasn't quite sure whether these data were available. In fact, this study was done for Colombia, which surprised me that those data were available for Colombia. And the question of my friend, would a collaborative effort to do it on both sides and see the comparison between the two be of interest to you?
Yeah, I can actually, quite a lot of Latin American countries are pretty good at having this data in place. So, I mean, if I focus on one area, I actually attended the lobby session earlier today. So we talk about lobbying data, and I know that a register is being launched in Cyprus, hopefully by October. Although, from my understanding, currently there isn't an effective way of actually ensuring that politicians are going to fill this out, and also companies fill out the register and as interested parties to meet politicians. So we'll see how effective that is. So my answer in terms of it's not available, and that's one of the reasons that Cyprus is low on the Corruption Perceptions Index. Well, it's an interesting question. So the EU actually just launched a new anti-corruption package, a draft directive in May, which we hope, but also they hope to pass before the European elections next year. It includes many different aspects, but it has an area on preventive measures, which includes aspects such as open and transparent data, also having a well-resourced independent anti-corruption authority. And if this was passed, then there would be similar to, some people might be familiar, but similar to like the EU whistleblowing directive that was passed a number of years ago, then an EU member state such as Cyprus would have to transpose that directive once it's, so then there will be expectations from the EU level that this data is available. And something that it also has is that it will harmonize definitions of corruption in each EU member state, because something that we highlight at TI is that obviously corruption has no borders. It just isn't contained in one country, but often there's influence from between countries in regards to public decision making. There's flows of dirty money between countries, etc. So having that in place will be a really huge step for Europe once that we hope the standard that exists in it already is approved by the Parliament and the Council.
Actually, there is ground for comparative study because thanks to Transparency International, we have some scores and figures for the Greek Cypriot Society. And thanks to what we are doing with Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, we have this corruption perceptions thing. Plus, actually, I and Ömer Gökçekuş, we ran a parallel show where we also do something similar to corruption barometer. So we are doing the same thing with ordinary people as well, which makes actually a comparison easier. And I and Hubert actually, we are working on this particular. Our focus is on party politics, patronage, clientelistic relations, though, and we are looking into the historical roots actually, because according to many, political clientelism or patronage is a form of political corruption. So hopefully soon we'll have something to share with you. Thank you.
Can I just answer that one as well? Just to clarify, the CPI, so it's a perceptions index. So in terms of the data you're referring to, yes, we have that comparison in regards to it's an aggregated index of different sources, of secondary sources that we collect and analyze. So for example, like indexes like the World Bank or the World Economic Forum or the VDEM Democracy Index. It's different from data that I'm referring to in terms of lobbying data or political finance. So in regards to perception data, yes, there's comparison. And we do have Cyprus in the Corruption Perception Index, but unfortunately, only in the south, because we rely on those other sources being available. We have to have 3 of those sources of the 13 to be able to analyze the CPI in a country.
Specific to say, but I will come to the critical question, since we are talking about transparency. What is the level of transparency in the Republic of Cyprus? I can say in brief that thanks to the efforts of GRECO, GRECO is a Council of Europe body against corruption. For 20 years, GRECO is pushing for transparency and for the adoption of measures against corruption to all states, for the government, for the parliament, for the judiciary. What is the experience? What the experience says that those responsible are trailing their feet. They take measures a little bit, then after a new push, a little bit more, etc., etc. So mostly, transparency is lacking because of semi-measures, because of unwillingness to approach transparency as a precondition for other things, not just for the sake of saying that, okay, these are the elements, they are in front of you, so you can say. And we have these phenomena of party funding, for example. The latest law about party funding and funding of elections, etc., was adopted in 2015 after GRECO pushed for it, etc. But according to the reports by the Auditor General, this is lacking critical elements in order for this transparency element for it to be efficient enough and so that a control, that this is really under control or according to the law. And there is nothing, for example, about the spending in elections of presidential candidates. The only thing that the law says is that they have a threshold of 1 million euros for the campaign. And the campaign is limited also to, if I remember well, only 6 months. But presidential elections can start very much earlier. And the current president showed in his account that he received at least 20% of his funding were from one entity, from one company. And how can this stand? 1 million and you receive one, and it could be half or the whole sum. There is nothing according to the law that could be a problem. And transparency has been achieved through other ways. For example, through investigative committees, committees of investigation. We saw this in the case of the golden passports, etc., etc. They were published. Everything was published, and there were the reports were showing for persons that were liable for committing illegal acts, etc., etc. What happened? Nothing, because transparency, as said, should serve a goal, and for this goal to be served, specific actions, etc., by specific institutions should be taken. So this is a big problem. And coming back to GRECO and international bodies in general, of course, they are very useful, what they do, and pushing forward, etc. But in order for, they say, okay, they have set these, they have taken these measures. They have, for example, adopted also codes of conduct. We remember code of conduct for ministers, code of conduct for public servants, etc. But what is the mechanism? The mechanism of overseeing the implementation and the enforcement of these codes of conduct? Nothing. And in order for Greco to come again, etc., we should wait for the next round of report, of monitoring and reporting, which takes years and years. And again, the responsible authorities could take another small step, which is again a semi-major, and we are at the same level. And last point is that related to what happened after transparency, or elements of transparency come to light after an investigation committee does its work. The institutions that should have taken the next step, the Attorney General's office or the legal office of the government, has done nothing. Why? Because there is a big problem. The former president appointed there 2 former ministers, and these 2 former ministers are called to investigate activities or decisions by the government in which they were participating. And we saw after the Al Jazeera case, which was brought to the courts, that the main argument of the attorneys, of the lawyers of the accused persons, was that they were taking part in the decisions that for which our clients are accused. So it's a kind of a vicious circle that has no end.
Thank you. Other questions, comments from the audience? If not, let me ask a concluding question to all 3 of you. Which mechanism of transparency, in your judgment, would be the most efficient or should be implemented, or would you recommend, or 1 or 2 that help maybe most to combat corruption? I don't know, Flora, you're going to start because you're probably the best prepared for that.
I mean, I probably will repeat myself in saying that having accessible data in an open data format so that's machine readable is key, because it then empowers other actors to be that accountability. Again, whether that's an oversight body, ministries, the Ministry of Justice, or civil society and journalists. So that open data format is key, and we've seen that working. So for example, at the EU level, our platform Integrity Watch, but also the EU themselves, has an open lobby register, which maps who exactly MEPs have met, who enters Parliament, who meets with also in regards to different legislative packages. For example, our data shows that by far the biggest topic is around the European Green Deal, and that fossil fuel companies want to meet with MEPs to influence that. So it's such an important tool that we strongly advise all governments to introduce, to allow that accountability can flourish in a country and fight corruption.
So coming to what I said before, it means a complete reshuffle of the environment in which we are living. Because if the institutions are already run by persons that are implicated, involved in corruption, or they involved in decisions that led to corruption, how these institutions could work for fighting corruption. And okay, we should say here that corruption is not something that can be eliminated, totally eliminated. What is the critical point? The critical point is that in countries where rule of law dominates, governs. There is corruption also, but there is also the good function of institutions, and people are brought before the justice. In France, for example, in the past 20 years, there are several politicians, including former President Sarkozy, who has already been convicted to jail for corruption. And there are new cases against him and also other politicians. And if corruption cannot be eliminated, corruption can be limited, provided that everyone knows that beware, there are mechanisms, there are institutions that can efficiently work in order to bring anyone who is corrupted before the courts.
I'll refer to our reports because we conclude the reports with policy recommendations. And one of them is, it's basically transparency, including declaration of assets and liabilities, and making it in a very transparent way so that people can have access to see who has what. Because we have a law in the north which forces the public employees to declare their assets, but nobody checks them. So it's there, they're locked in a safe. So as long as you don't give access to journalists and wider public to check what's going on there, there's no point. I mean, you can declare everything. Yeah? So that's one thing, and one thing which is very similar to this is access to information. Again, by law, the government departments are required to reply within a month. They never do so. So you have to enforce them. As Christophoros put it, I mean, you can have all these mechanisms. They're not self-enforcing. So as long as you don't enforce them, they're just there for the sake of ticking the boxes, as Flora put it. And lastly, I mean, it comes back to our area of specialization, clientelism and patronage. I mean, in our case particularly, it's terrible. There are many patronage appointments at the top level. I mean, all directors, all undersecretaries, all members of the board, all board members of semi-governmental organizations change when the government changes. I mean, sometimes they change even without a government change, maybe if there is a cabinet shuffle. Yeah? And this creates a huge damage on the public services, because it means you are always, these are nepotistic, etc. And on top of that, it kills the institutional memory. So that's one of the biggest problems in the north. I mean, it's a mess. There is no one. Well, I mean, I'm exaggerating. Maybe there are only few officials who are competent and who know what they're doing. So limiting that number of appointments, political appointments, would be a huge step in the right direction.
You can already hear that the Cyprus Forum has moved from the work to the pleasure mode as far as the background noise is concerned, and I think I should prevent you from joining it, but I don't want to do that without thanking, first of all, the three speakers and their fantastic contributions. Thank you so much. Thanking the helping hands from the Ebert-Foundation, Tobias, Elizabeth, and Anna. And last but not least, you for attending and hopefully enjoying the panel. Have a wonderful evening. See you soon. Bye.